Early in the 1980s, a charismatic leader arose in Miami.
Why art thou so far?
He drew the weak, the poor, and the powerless to his side. He promised them a better life, but they had to follow his commands to earn it. His temples soon sprouted across the country as thousands were drawn to his gospel. And those who questioned his doctrine started turning up dead. Local police and the FBI had to stop him.
In Miami, the discovery of a mutilated body sent investigators on the trail of a deadly cult. But agents found a wall of silence around the cult's members. Potential witnesses, terrified of reprisals, refused to talk. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. It would take a massive operation involving 120 agents in 7 cities to bring down a deranged fanatic who believed he was God.
Friday, November 13th, 1981, Miami, Florida. On the outskirts of the city, a construction foreman was checking his work site. On a dirt road, he came upon something wrapped in blankets. It was a body. He called police. Detectives from Miami-Dade responded. The foreman said he hadn't seen the body when he passed by earlier that morning.
What's happening? Got a problem here.
The body must have been laid there recently.
What? No head. Not yet.
The detectives inspected the remains. It was an African-American male. He had been decapitated. Detectives found only a set of keys on the victim. There was no wallet or identification.
No? We just...
4 feet away, detectives found the victim's head wrapped in sheets.
How far do you think it's worth?
His fingerprints were taken in the hopes that they might help identify the man. Decapitations are rare, usually performed to hide a murder victim's identity. According to Detective John King, that wasn't the motive here.
There was no attempt to hide or prevent identification because they left the head actually on the scene. Usually, if you're going to try to prevent an identification from being made, you would take other body parts, such as the hands or the head also. It seems like it was more ritualistic than anything else, how he was killed.
The victim's face was badly damaged. Visual identification would be difficult. And unless the man's fingerprints were on record, investigators would have no way of identifying him from his prints. Perhaps the autopsy could tell them more. The medical examiner determined that the victim had been severely beaten before his decapitation. His nose was bloodied, his teeth were broken, and his eyes were swollen shut. His wrists showed ligature marks, and sneaker tread marks on his body suggested he'd been kicked. On the back of his neck, the medical examiner found evidence of repeated blows from a dull blade.
Right side, yeah, up in the stomach. Decapitation.
It had been a large weapon, perhaps a machete. Comparing the victim's fingerprints wouldn't be easy. In 1981, the database wasn't computerized.
You gotta take a look.
Features of the print had to be compared manually against thousands in arrest files. Eventually, one investigator hit the mark. The victim's name was Aston Green, age 25.
All right.
He had been arrested a month earlier for a misdemeanor driving charge in Fort Lauderdale.
Yeah, we got a match.
They found no history of violent crime.
5'10".
Detectives went to Aston Green's last known address, his mother's house.
With this crime, okay?
My son?
Yes, ma'am. Can you maybe help us out by telling us when
After
the last time
informing
you saw
Mrs. Green of her son's death, detectives asked her about
I can't tell
Aston.
you right now because it's an ongoing investigation.
She said her son had recently turned to religion.
We need to ask you a couple questions.
He seemed very serious about it. She'd last seen him 2 weeks earlier. She'd prepared a vegetarian meal for him in accordance with his new religious beliefs.
So tell me what's going on with you? What are you doing?
They talked about his conversion. He explained he was a Hebrew Israelite, a Yahweh. She told investigators that his son was committed to his Yahweh beliefs.
That's when we first heard the word Yahweh. I had no idea what the Yahweh was all about. I never heard the name before, knew nothing about them.
I don't know, but
Aston Green's mother didn't know his new address, though she did have a phone number.
this is the number that he gave me the last time I saw him.
She said he had a housemate but didn't know his name.
Information that you can have that might help.
From the phone number, detectives determined Green's new address, about 12 miles from downtown Miami. Due to the violent nature of the murder, they called for backup before approaching the house. No one answered.
Dade County Police, open up!
Perhaps Green's housemate had been harmed too. Detectives decided to enter the house. The key they found in Green's pocket fit the lock.
Dade County Police!
We entered the house thinking that hopefully we wouldn't find any other bodies, but we went in to check it out. We found a number of items of a religious nature, textbooks, workbooks, a lot of literature. It turned out that it was from the Hebrew Israelite religion.
There was no sign of the housemate.
We also found a machete that was tucked to the side of one of the sofas in the residence. We immediately became interested in the machete because that could be a weapon to decapitate somebody.
The machete appeared to be clean. Investigators continued their search. By the door, they found a phone number. They traced it to a house 2 miles away.
3012. Hi, I'm Detective Christopher. This is Detective King. Can we talk to you for a few minutes?
At the house, the detectives talked with a group of Hebrew Israelites.
I'm sorry to have to inform you, but
Among them was Aston Green's housemate, Carlton Carey. All of them knew Green through the Yahweh Temple.
Mr. Green.
They told investigators that Green, like themselves, had grown disillusioned with the rigid social doctrine of the temple.
Can you tell me something about
I've seen him in the temple, but I don't know.
To them, adherence to the temple's leader was at too high a price.
and we're just trying to get as much information.
Their colored turbans signified their desire to break away from it.
It makes this much easier on us.
We spoke to them briefly. We got a little bit of background information on the temple and what it was all about. And we asked them to respond to the homicide office so that we could take statements and in-depth interviews with them about what happened and what they knew.
Several suggested that the killers were probably zealous members of the Yahweh temple who wanted to silence those who questioned the doctrine. Most were afraid to say more, especially to police. They were already branded dissenters. They feared any further disobedience could be punished by death.
Well, all the people that we spoke to perceived a great deal of danger because of threats that had been made to them, both on the phone and by word of mouth from other members that were still in the organization. They were concerned for their safety, and the death of Aston Green certainly confirmed this.
The next day, Green's housemates came to the police station to talk. Despite the threat, Carlton Carey and his wife wanted to help. His wife was interviewed in a separate room at the station. Carey said that he and Green had embraced the temple until recently, when its leader, Hulon Mitchell, started calling himself the true Messiah. The charismatic leader of the temple, Hulon Mitchell, believed that blacks were descended from the lost Hebrew tribe of Judah. As followers of Mitchell, members abandoned their given names. They took a biblical first name and adopted the last name of Israel. Mitchell did not allow dissent among his followers. Mitchell eventually changed his name to Yahweh ben Yahweh, which means God, Son of God.
In fact, during the interview we had with him, he referred to Hulon as not the Messiah, but a crook and a swindler, which was his characterization of Hulon Mitchell at that time.
Carey still had reservations about talking to police. Detectives offered to escort him home.
Gentlemen, a ride home?
Fine.
All right.
He declined, opting to leave with his wife alone.
When they left the homicide office that night, they didn't want to be escorted because any police being with them would be further attraction to anybody that saw them, and they were concerned about being seen with anybody. They didn't want us to escort them home.
Carey and his wife took a winding route home to make sure no one had followed them. They never suspected someone to be waiting inside. As Miami police investigated the beheading of a dissident member of a religious group, 2 informants were ambushed in their home. Carlton Carey had been shot to death. His wife, Mildred Banks, had also been shot, and her throat was slashed. She barely clung to life. Like the beheading victim, the 2 were dissident members of the Hebrew Israelites. At the scene, police found a bloodied machete. Detective John King believed a similar weapon had been used in the earlier beheading.
The fact that a machete was actually used in an attempt on Mildred's life certainly give more credence to the belief that the Hebrew Israelites were involved in it.
Detectives learned that many members of the Hebrew Israelite movement owned machetes. Police searched the house. Nothing found at the scene indicated who was responsible for the assault. Whoever the killers were, they had cut the phone line and left no physical trace of themselves behind. Detectives' only hope was Mildred Banks. If doctors could save her, perhaps she could name her attackers.
Mildred was very seriously injured as a result of the attack on her. She was shot in the chest, the bullet was still in her, and she had a deep gash to the left side of her neck. she was given a very low probability of surviving those injuries.
Police waited several days to see if she would survive surgery. Without her description of events, investigators had little hope of solving the case. Mildred Banks pulled through. When she was conscious, investigators visited her in the recovery room. Though critically wounded, she was able to answer questions from the police. She said that she and her husband had driven by their house several times to be sure no one had followed them. They saw no one, so they went inside. She was certain that her attackers were Yahweh's, sent because they had spoken to police that day. She never saw their faces.
We were concerned that they may actually make an attempt on her at the hospital, so we posted 2 police officers at all times with her throughout her stay at the hospital. They were there 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for approximately 1 month.
The message of this most recent attack was clear to dissenting members of the Yahweh Temple. Those who spoke out or cooperated with police would suffer reprisals.
After the homicide of Carlton Carey, we were not able to locate any of the former members that had split from the temple. They had fled in different directions. They became scared and they just left.
Detective King needed to learn more about the Yahweh organization. He and his partner visited its Miami temple.
We tried interviewing people and we really got nowhere. Every time we spoke to somebody, it was praise Yahweh or, see the public information office at the temple.
Through a spokesperson, Hulon Mitchell, the Yahweh leader, claimed to know nothing about the murders and offered no help. Suspecting he knew more, investigators began surveillance on the Yahweh enterprise.
The surveillance was sort of a constant rolling type surveillance where you drive by, write down some tag numbers, but to actually set off and watch the place, it was impossible because at all times there were guards standing outside the temple watching the front door.
Detectives did learn that the Yahweh organization was extensive. In Florida and in 13 other states, the Yahweh's owned real estate, buses, and vehicles that the leader claimed totaled nearly $50 million. Some said membership topped 12,000 in Florida alone.
Most of these people are hard-working professionals that really didn't believe in a lot of what Hulon Mitchell was teaching. Certainly they were not racist to the level that he was, and they were not believing much of what he was telling them about him being the Messiah. They did, however, believe much of what the religion itself taught, surrounding Judaism and the Muslim religion.
Since the Yahweh organization spanned several states, the FBI began investigating. Supervisory Special Agent Herbert Cousins was assigned as case agent. He believed the organization demonstrated elements of domestic terrorism.
Domestic terrorism investigations are conducted in a group of individuals who engage in criminal activities to further their social or political goal.
Local and federal investigators looked deeper into the organization.
Why art thou so far from helping me?
Hulon Mitchell invited the homeless, the destitute, and the ex-con to join his Hebrew Israelites.
Thine anger. The Lord shall swallow them up. The request of his
People with
liberty
no job or family found a place to belong, receiving food, shelter, and employment.
for the Son, which
This
is as a
kindness
bridegroom
didn't
coming
reflect
out
Mitchell's
of the
underlying
chamber
mission.
from the earth. And their seed
He taught that blacks, as the true Jewish people, had a crucial role.
for they intended evil against thee.
He told his followers that their duty was to bring about heaven on earth by destroying the white oppressors.
Knowledge.
To his most avid followers, Yahweh ben Yahweh was the Messiah, and everything they had belonged to him,
Line has gone out,
including their labor.
and their words to the end of the world.
To raise revenue, the Yahwehs manufactured and packaged their own hair care products, tonics, beverages, t-shirts, wine, and more. The merchandise was shipped to his network of temples all over the country. Yahweh required his members to reach certain income goals for their temple by selling these wares. In turn, the temple fed and sheltered them, and even educated their children. Despite the allegations of violence and his thinly veiled message of hate, Mitchell's temple continued to prosper and spread. According to Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Scruggs, the general public was unclear about Mitchell's true intentions.
The Yahwehs in the early 80s had been amassing power and property, and they had a kind of a dual reputation. People saw them as a somewhat scary group that they knew were preaching hatred and violence, but at the same time, they outwardly appeared to be quiet, well-behaved, mannered, and they would go in and buy these properties in distressed neighborhoods and actually clean them up.
Not everyone welcomed their presence in the neighborhood. In May 1986, people in Delray, Florida, drove them out. At around 2 a.m. the same night, the neighborhood was firebombed. The fire destroyed the entire block and injured 1 adult and 3 children, including a 9-month-old infant. Police suspected Yahweh members were responsible. One officer recalled an incident that happened in the area about an hour before the bombing. While cruising the neighborhood, he spotted some men dressed in black standing near a van. The area reeked of gasoline. The men seemed suspicious, but they weren't doing anything illegal. They claimed they were having engine trouble. He took down the license plate number and left. Police determined that the van was registered to an elder at the Yahweh Temple. Hulon Mitchell denied any involvement in the firebombing attack. One of his followers was more cooperative.
We were able to develop an informant who actually walked into the FBI, who provided information regarding the group.
The informant confirmed investigators' suspicions that Mitchell's henchmen were responsible for the firebombing. But he had no direct evidence. He then gave agents information about another crime. He confessed that he had participated in the slaying of Aston Green, the man found beheaded on a dirt road. He said that the dead man had been considered a threat since he openly questioned Hulon Mitchell's authority. Green was abducted from the temple and severely beaten.
All right, head back to the van. Head back to the second.
The informant drove him there, and another member carried out Mitchell's order to behead him.
All right, let's go, let's go! Get out of here, let's go!
Why should we believe?
The information was crucial but limited. Investigators still had no physical evidence tying Hulon Mitchell to Green's murder. Authorities would have to carefully build trust among the ex-members. Detective John King re-interviewed Mildred Banks, the woman who had been ambushed in her home.
In following up from the information with Woodside, I made contact with Mildred Banks, and she turned me on to an individual that was a former member of the organization that might be able to assist me. I subsequently made contact with that person, who took me around to a number of locations where former members resided.
As investigators continued their search for a witness courageous enough to come forward, Miami police received more disturbing news. A murder victim was found in his car with both ears cut off. Police wondered if this ritualistic killing could be related to the machete attacks. In September of 1986, as FBI and Miami police investigated the leader of the Yahwehs, Hulon Mitchell, police responded to another bizarre murder. 61-year-old Raymond Kelly was found stabbed to death in his vehicle. Both ears had been severed. One was recovered at the scene. Police believed the killer took the other. Metro-Dade Homicide Lieutenant Rex Remley's squad worked the case.
In the Dade County area, we had experienced a number of cases in which victims had been murdered and there was an ear missing. In several of those cases, it appeared that it may be the same perpetrator that had committed the crime.
To investigators, it looked as if Kelly had been drinking just prior to his death. Detectives collected several sets of prints from the vehicle. But what investigators found missing from the car held greater importance. According to the victim's wife, he always kept a .38 revolver in his glove compartment. Now it was gone. The gun's serial number was entered into the National Crime Information Computer. If the gun turned up anywhere in the country, Miami-Dade police would be notified. Weeks later, police in Opelika, a suburb of Miami, responded to emergency calls from residents of an apartment complex.
It was an apartment complex that had recently been taken under siege, for lack of a better term, by the Yahwehs.
Tenants who lived there called it the Dirt Road Apartments. A low-income housing project, some local residents considered it an eyesore. Many were delighted when the Yahweh leader Hulon Mitchell bought the property. Dirt Road residents were not.
Unfortunately for the residents, their idea of taking the building over was to actually move the residents out, and sometimes, according to the residents, that was by force, where the Yahwehs would actually come into their apartments and remove furniture and belongings while the people objected but had no real way to stop these individuals.
The Yahweh's strong-arm eviction efforts made the TV news. One resident, Anthony Brown, was particularly outspoken.
I'm gonna stay here until I get eviction notice. I don't care what they say.
I do, because they ain't going in. Just simple as that.
He cursed the Yahweh's leader, Hulon Mitchell.
Stand around and look.
Investigators knew that Mitchell didn't tolerate public criticism.
Yahweh.
Witnesses told police that tensions at the apartments continued after night fell. That evening, violence erupted and 2 men were killed. Police responded to the double murder. They chased one of 2 suspects in the shooting.
Get your hands up!
A canine unit tracked down the man. The suspect carried nothing in his pockets except 2 bullets.
We got the bullets out of his left pocket.
Nearby, police recovered a .38 caliber revolver. It was not the murder weapon. Police cross-checked its serial number in the crime computer but found no match.
Your room right here. Just keep an eye on you for this.
The suspect was arrested and taken to the Opelika police station. Metro-Dade Lieutenant Rex Remley interviewed him there.
I was just trying to get his basic information. Was that he had told me that he was Nehemiah Israel, and when I asked him about his age, he told me that he was over 400 years old. So that's the type of individual that I was dealing with.
The name he gave was a Yahweh name, and police found Yahweh clothing in the car he had used to flee. Police suspected that he had been sent to silence those who had spoken out against the Yahwehs. A fingerprint match revealed that the suspect's real name was Robert Rozier. He had spent time in prison for burglary and car theft. Lieutenant Remley also learned that he was a former football player in the National Football League.
He then began to have problems after he had left his football career. He had a history that went from crimes in Maryland to crimes in San Francisco area to crimes in Dade County. So he had an extensive past.
Rozier's arrest marked the first time an active member of Hulon Mitchell's group was caught at a crime scene. Though they could only charge Rozier with loitering and prowling, authorities suspected he was guilty of much more. Miami police looked for more information from residents who lived nearby the complex. Most residents were reluctant, but several came forward.
We were able to determine that Mr. Rozier had in fact been involved in chasing Mr. Brown across the field. He was present, it was our feeling, when the shots were fired where Mr. Brown was killed, and that he had also attempted to flee from the scene. He was charged that morning with the murder of Mr. Brown.
Lieutenant Remley still wondered about the handgun found at the time of Rozier's arrest. It was a .38 revolver, the same type missing from the car of murder victim Raymond Kelly. Though a computer check failed to match the guns, Lieutenant Remley pulled Raymond Kelly's file just to be sure.
There had to be more of a story to this gun. And I finally found the documents that had been provided by the family that showed the serial number of this gun. When I checked it, I was amazed to see that it was the exact same gun that we had impounded at Opelika that night. Unfortunately, when the gun had been entered into the computer, one of the digits had been displaced in some way, and therefore when we ran the gun found at the scene of the murder in Opelika, it did not show as being Raymond Kelly's stolen weapon.
Robert Rozier was now connected to the murder of Raymond Kelly. Prints lifted from Kelly's vehicle matched Rozier's. His fingerprint was found at another slashed-ear murder as well. Investigators had enough evidence to charge him with 2 slashed-ear murders and the double murder at the Dirt Road Apartments. Rozier found himself facing 4 first-degree murder charges, and very likely, the death penalty. As Miami investigators tried to close in on Yahweh leader Hulon Mitchell, they arrested a man suspected of being one of Mitchell's enforcers. Robert Rozier sat behind bars facing 4 capital murder charges. Investigators hoped Rozier would turn on the leader. The Yahwehs and their organization became the target of public scrutiny. Hulon Mitchell, their leader, refused to meet the press. He stayed hidden behind his followers, who passed out pamphlets explaining that Rozier had been framed. The bad publicity could destroy all that Mitchell had built.
Yahweh.
He hired a high-priced attorney and public relations expert. It was Mitchell's first step in creating a new image for his organization.
Quickly as possible.
What the hell do you want?
I'm here to help you.
Mitchell offered the attorney's legal help to Rozier.
Make this mess go away.
Rozier quickly realized that the attorney was there to protect the interests of Hulon Mitchell, not Rozier's.
Just talk to me.
But Rozier still refused to turn on the leader of the Yahwehs.
Roll 5.
Lieutenant Rex Remley recalls that the media attention prompted other insiders to talk.
The media brought out different stories about people that had been inside the organization who wanted to speak about what had occurred. And it also brought other people to law enforcement who, for maybe the first time, realized that there was a significant reason at this point that people were being killed, and it was time to come forward and tell what you knew.
Right.
Investigators got a call from Oklahoma. One of Hulon Mitchell's relatives wanted to talk. She told them she'd witnessed a martial arts expert from New Orleans beaten to death by Yahwehs in 1983. She said Mitchell had ordered the beating. The young man's name was Leonard Dupree. Dupree was killed because Hulon Mitchell believed the man had been disrespectful.
He changed his name.
Detectives tracked down Dupree's mother in New Orleans.
Hello, my name is Rex Remley.
She confirmed that Leonard was a martial arts expert and had left home in 1983 to join the Yahwehs. But without a body or other evidence, investigators couldn't arrest Mitchell. While investigators were learning about Hulon Mitchell's dark secrets, he was opening his temple to the public.
Water course down the hall. Okay. And you're off.
To improve its image, Mitchell encouraged the most avid followers to take work in the community at large. But one avid member was beginning to change his mind about the leader he had followed so closely. For weeks, Robert Rozier sat behind bars, watching Hulon Mitchell distance himself further and further from the murder suspect. Then, in June of 1987, Mitchell formally excommunicated Robert Rozier on live TV. With the symbolic stroke of a marker, Mitchell had separated himself from Rozier permanently. Rozier had no one left to protect but himself. He decided to begin working with the FBI. It was the break agents were hoping for. Just after his transfer to federal prison, Rozier told investigators that he knew of at least 20 murders across the country that had been ordered by the Yahweh leader Hulon Mitchell. To agents, it was clear that Mitchell hid behind organized religion as a front for organized crime.
Why?
Rozier also explained why he and another man killed Anthony Brown and Rudy Broussard at the apartments in Opelika. For Special Agent Herbert Cousins, it confirmed what he already suspected.
Brown and Broussard were executed. That's pretty much what happened. They resisted being evicted from their homes, and they spoke out on TV against the Yahwehs, and we were told that was the reason why they were murdered.
Rozier also confessed to the murder of Raymond Kelly and another man whose ears had been cut off. Rozier told agents that the Yahweh leader directed him to kill as many white devils as possible and to return with an ear as proof. With Rozier, the FBI had a witness who could connect Hulon Mitchell to deadly violence. But because he was a killer himself, Rozier wasn't an ideal prosecution witness. U.S. Attorney Richard Scruggs needed to find others willing to corroborate Rozier's stories.
We just started traveling all over the country, tracking down these individuals, trying to convince them to testify and to cooperate. One of the questions that we would get early on from the witnesses or from the prospective witnesses was, will I be at risk if I testify? Will something happen to me? Am I likely to get killed? It's the only time in my 22 years of experience that I have told people, because I felt like I had to tell them, is that yes, there is a chance that you will suffer retribution.
Hulan Mitchell fought the investigation by continuing to polish his public image.
I would like everybody to give a nice warm welcome.
He continued to turn distressed buildings into gleaming properties.
The opening of the store.
As Yahweh ben Yahweh, he toned down his anti-white message and made large contributions to popular causes.
I think it'll make the area a better place.
Watching Yahweh become stronger and stronger and watching him become more and more accepted by the community, I, as well as all of the investigators, felt he had to be stopped.
Hulan Mitchell became a bigger-than-life public figure, enjoying all the legitimacy money could buy. He seemed unstoppable. After almost a decade of investigation, the FBI still lacked enough evidence to arrest self-proclaimed Messiah, Hulan Mitchell. Intimidation and murder had silenced most who dared to speak out against him. Assistant U.S. Attorney Richard Scruggs had a difficult time persuading members to overcome their fear.
I prayed with people, I begged people, I cajoled people, I urged them to do the moral thing, I urged them to do the ethical thing, I urged them to fight a false religion, and basically used every means I had available to me to convince people to cooperate.
Those bold enough to stand up against Hulan Mitchell, the man who called himself the Son of God, were placed under witness protection.
Do hereby proclaim Sunday, October 2nd, 1990, as Yahweh ben Yahweh Day.
As Mitchell continued to thwart the investigation privately, publicly, his legitimacy grew as Yahweh ben Yahweh.
He's having photo op sessions with the mayor. The mayor proclaims Yahweh ben Yahweh Day, and there are banners on the streets saying, proclaiming Yahweh ben Yahweh Day.
In October 1990, despite his public successes, the FBI filed sealed arrest warrants for him and a dozen of his followers. They were kept secret to allow the FBI a month to plan the arrest. Agents dubbed the plan Operation Jericho. Special Agent Herbert Cousins knew it would be dangerous to take Yahweh ben Yahweh in Miami, since he was at the height of his popularity there.
This is actually
the main issue for law enforcement was safety. The safety of the individuals, the law enforcement members involved in the arrest, and also the safety of innocent individuals and the safety of Yahweh members, including Yahweh ben Yahweh.
We'll go with
Fortunately, Mitchell and others named in the indictment were scheduled to embark on a multi-city tour. Yahweh ben Yahweh's first stop would be in New Orleans. The main arrest team would seize him at his hotel. Once he was in custody, teams in 6 other cities would capture his henchmen across the South.
There were a number of arrest teams in different cities, several cities: Atlanta, North Carolina, New Orleans, Miami. I was sent to New Orleans to assist the New Orleans division with the arrest of Yahweh ben Yahweh.
On November 6, 1990, Hulan Mitchell arrived at the Monteleone Hotel in New Orleans. The FBI was already there.
The meeting went well.
Right.
To track Mitchell's movements, undercover agents were posted on every floor.
They're coming up now. They're coming up.
Throughout the South, teams took their positions outside Yahweh temples and waited for orders from Miami. Success depended on an unbroken flow of communication. The agents in Miami coordinated the entire operation.
Everybody's ready to go.
At 3 a.m., everyone was in place. They gave New Orleans the go-ahead. Agents in the hotel called Mitchell's room.
The first instruction was that he instruct his bodyguard to turn himself into the agents who were waiting down the hall.
Here comes the bodyguard.
The second instruction was that he come out with his hands up and that he walk slowly down the hall.
Let's go. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go.
Agents didn't know if Mitchell or his bodyguards were carrying weapons.
Let me see your hands.
Finally, their main suspect emerged.
Hands on your head. And on your knees.
They sent word to Miami.
You're under arrest.
Mitchell was captured.
Commit murder. Go.
Gotta go.
The other teams swarmed in, arresting the criminal members of Mitchell's temple.
Get down! Down! Get out of here! Next passenger! Open the side door! Step to the rear of the van!
In a matter of minutes, scores of agents mobilized to capture a dozen suspects across hundreds of miles.
Make them form a line. Stand beside each other.
No one was hurt. We accomplished our goal. We arrested as many individuals as we could identify during the operation, and that's why I believe it was very successful.
Yulon Mitchell was charged with extortion, conspiracy, and murder in aid of racketeering.
You have the right to remain silent.
Prosecutor Scruggs believed he was still dangerous.
We found out that there was actually a hit team of 5 individuals who were stalking us, trying to find out where we were so that they could kill us upon the orders of Yahweh ben Yahweh.
At trial, his intimidation even penetrated the jury.
We knew there were serious problems. We knew people were scared. Several jurors actually got dismissed prior to deliberations because they were scared to go back and deliberate.
Perhaps it was fear that caused what prosecutors considered only a partial victory. In May 1992, Yulon Mitchell and 6 of his more violent followers were found guilty of conspiracy. But Mitchell himself received only 18 years in a maximum security federal prison. It had been a difficult case for investigators.
He found a successful philosophy that people would flock to and actually start joining and pledge their allegiance to him. And I think the more power he obtained, the more influence he obtained over his followers, that he ultimately lost control of himself. And he believed in his own mind he could do anything, even order life and death.
Yulon Mitchell is locked away, his murderous actions halted by those who saw through his false gospel. In the late 80s, Florida's cocaine imports were among the highest in the nation. Regional territories were enforced with intimidation and murder. One dealer bowed to no one, not even law enforcement. Desperate to stop the violence, authorities turned to the FBI for help.
A suspected drug dealer would stop at nothing to keep local and federal authorities from building a case against him. When his organization started targeting the government itself, federal agencies went on high alert. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. He was a desperate man, driven to desperate measures. Bringing him down would take the combined efforts of the DEA, the ATF, and the FBI.
Fort Myers Beach, Florida, July 18, 1987. It was a Saturday night in a Gulf Coast beach town with a thriving nightlife and a booming drug trade. Away from the tourists, many local residents spent the weekend at private parties. For some, that included cocaine. At one party, several men waited for their friend to return with more drugs. He'd been gone for about a half an hour when they heard what sounded like gunshots at around 10 p.m. The owner of the car, whose vehicle was used for the drug run, saw that it was now parked out front. Inside, he found his friend shot to death. The Lee County Sheriff's Department responded to the scene. A forensic technician found only one identifiable fingerprint on the car. It belonged to the vehicle's owner. Lying close to the driver's door were 7 empty .22 caliber shell casings. Investigators determined the victim had been shot at close range. An autopsy would reveal 8 bullet wounds in his upper body and traces of cocaine in his bloodstream. The owner of the car said the dead man was his friend, 29-year-old Craig Karen. Reluctantly, he told homicide detectives that the victim had left earlier to buy cocaine. The victim's girlfriend suggested police should question her boyfriend's cocaine dealer.
Has he been violent before? Kind of stuff is he doing?
He owed the dealer money for drugs. The dealer had a reputation for violence. Lee County homicide detective Tom Continos learned the dealer's name was Jeff Saganek.
Jeff is a young kid from Fort Myers Beach who had established himself as what I thought to be a mid-level drug dealer on the beach. Through talking to Craig's associates, I learned that Craig owed Jeff a large amount of money. And the reputation was that you better pay your bills with Jeff or he's going to send someone to collect it.
The next day, an unexpected visitor appeared at the Lee County Sheriff's Department. It was the alleged cocaine dealer himself, 23-year-old Jeff Saganek. He asked to see the detective investigating the previous night's killing. He wanted to give a statement. The reputed dealer, with a history of arrests, heard he might be a suspect and wanted to set the record straight. On the night of the murder, Jeff Saganek claimed that he and his girlfriend were at a restaurant for a late dinner. He said that he had talked to the victim in the parking lot just before the couple sat down to eat. After a few minutes, the man left. The reputed dealer said he and his girlfriend were at the restaurant from about 9:45 until 11 p.m. And he had more to offer than his word. Jeff Saganek handed the detective his restaurant receipt. The waitress who served them confirmed the story.
Yeah, I'll talk to her. Maybe we'll slide by the restaurant and see if...
It appeared he had an airtight alibi. But to the seasoned detective, it seemed Jeff Saganek was trying too hard to cover his tracks.
I had investigated enough homicides to see all different types of suspects and how they react and the reasons why they commit murder. For this young kid to come in, as well organized as he was, with an alibi, with witnesses, with receipts, he became my #1 suspect.
On a tip, the detective questioned a member of a local rock band who was also known to deal cocaine. He admitted that the victim sometimes bought drugs from him directly, which made Jeff Saganek, allegedly the largest dealer on the beach, angry over the lost sales. At about 11:15 on the night of the murder, Jeff Saganek came to the lounge where he was playing. According to the performer, Jeff Saganek boasted that he had just had the victim wasted and that it would teach the people of Fort Myers Beach a lesson. The musician's story was one of many over the next several months that confirmed what police already suspected. But even in the underworld of Fort Myers Beach, rumors and innuendo were not evidence of murder.
Everything that I got was hearsay. No one would really give me sworn testimony that says, I saw this, or I saw that, or I know this and I know that. It was all he said, she said type of intelligence information, which is maybe okay for drug cases, but not with murder investigations. You need sworn testimony of people who actually saw something happen.
Then, in the summer of 1988, over a year after the murder, the detective finally got a break. A young woman came forward, claiming to have witnessed the killing. She had not spoken up sooner because she was addicted to drugs and was protecting her former supplier, Jeff Saganek.
Craig Karen. He had it hidden.
Now she was clean and wanted to tell detectives what she had seen on the night of July 18th, 1987.
But when he told me to go.
She was on her way to the cocaine party that evening when she witnessed the shooting. The gunman was her former boyfriend, a man who worked for Jeff Saganek. But the detective would be unable to speak to her boyfriend directly. Just a few months after the murder, her boyfriend had committed suicide. She told police that she also had direct knowledge about Jeff Saganek and his organization. The woman said Jeff and his right-hand man operated out of a local pizza parlor that Saganek owned. The dealer stored his drugs and money at several different locations and moved between them to avoid detection. Few people knew where he actually lived. Jeff Saganek had many people on his payroll, but she knew only a handful. Her former boyfriend was one of them, hired by Jeff Saganek to do whatever the dealer needed done. She and Jeff had also had an arrangement. In exchange for storing drugs and guns at her apartment, Jeff had paid her rent.
I'll see you in the morning, okay?
Unable to corroborate her story with other testimony or physical evidence, the detective could not charge Jeff Saganek with the murder.
I followed up on those leads, and I was not able to substantiate any of the information that she gave me at that point. So without the trigger man, without a gun, without eyewitness testimony, I couldn't get to Jeff. I couldn't get to Jeff. I had no physical evidence, no testimonial evidence that enabled me to bring charges against Jeff.
The homicide detective looked to the Lee County Narcotics Unit for help. Detectives began surveillance on Jeff Saganek's pizza parlor hoping to identify someone they could turn against the dealer. The place was a popular spot. It would take time for officers to discern the drug traffickers from the legitimate customers. To complicate matters, Jeff Saganek changed his name legally to Jeff Matthews, presumably to sever ties to his past crimes.
Jeff was the type of person where he wanted to be a clean-cut businessman. Jeff even went to the point of changing his name from Jeff Saganek to Jeff Matthews to try and help him with his reputation.
Over several weeks, investigators noted which people frequented Jeff Matthews' place without picking up any food. Investigators spotted one man who visited often. A license plate check revealed his name was Stephen Franken. Detectives speculated that Franken might be their connection to Jeff Matthews. Investigators called DEA Special Agent Dennis Bolam, who was already familiar with Stephen Franken. Agents believed Franken was a low-level cocaine dealer who procured his supply from Jeff Matthews, but they had no proof. To link the two men, Agent Bolam hoped to use an informant close to Franken.
I received some information from a cooperating source that Mr. Franken was distributing cocaine out of his house on Hibiscus Street in Fort Myers Beach, and that he was distributing to quite a few people down at the Fort Myers Beach area.
Their informant, recently arrested for possession, was one of Stephen Franken's biggest customers. For his cooperation in controlled drug buys from Franken, the informant would receive probation. If the purchases were successful, agents would be able to arrest Franken, then press him for direct testimony about Jeff Matthews and his organization.
Stephen Franken was important to the investigation. He had quite a bit of knowledge as far as drug trafficking that was taking place down at Fort Myers Beach, and with Jeffrey Matthews' participation in this drug trafficking.
The informant returned with cocaine. After several more buys, DEA agents finally had what they needed to make an arrest. On August 25, 1988, agents secured a felony arrest warrant for Stephen Franken for the sale and distribution of a controlled substance. Once Franken was in custody, agents searched his house. Inside, they found prepackaged cocaine, scales, and cash. In exchange for a shorter sentence, Franken agreed to cooperate with agents. He admitted that murder suspect Jeff Matthews was his cocaine supplier and consented to say so in front of the grand jury. Franken was released on bond until then. As investigators continued to hunt for evidence in their case against Matthews, deputies in nearby Collier County, Florida, responded to a crime scene. On October 2nd, 1988, a surveyor had discovered fully clothed, skeletonized human remains in a rural dump site. It appeared the body had been there for the past several weeks. Though there was no wallet or other ID, detectives did notice a paper bracelet on the victim's wrist, similar to those used by hospitals and nightclubs. Investigators gathered dental records from local families who had recently reported their loved ones as missing. They hoped one of them would match the unknown victims. The dental records, along with the body, were sent to the medical examiner for comparison. He first determined that the victim was a white male in his 20s, killed execution style with 5 .38 caliber bullets to the head. From the body's wrist, the ME removed the paper bracelet. He confirmed it was an admission ban from a nightclub in Fort Myers Beach. Dental records from a missing 22-year-old man last seen leaving the club confirmed that the murder victim was Thomas Sellers. A Collier County Sheriff's detective visited Sellers' father to give him the bad news.
Questions in reference to that. Has he been doing any illegal activities or hanging around anybody lately that...
The father told the detective that his son had a cocaine problem and believed the young man owed his dealer, Jeff Matthews, $1,000.
Sit down, what are you looking for?
It was also rumored that his son was last seen leaving the club with a man reputed to be a hitman for the dealer. But once again, investigators were unable to find evidence to corroborate the rumors.
Aware of him. Do you have any pictures of your son?
Agents and detectives' only direct witness to Matthews' operation was Stephen Franken, a low-level dealer arrested months earlier. They hoped his grand jury testimony would be enough to arrest a cocaine supplier suspected of ordering 2 executions. On January 27, 1990, as the DEA and Lee County, Florida sheriffs continued to pursue suspected cocaine dealer and murderer Jeff Matthews, detectives received a call about another possible homicide. At around midnight, a man was unpacking boxes in his new home when he heard the sound of a car squealing towards his house. The vehicle didn't stop until it reached his backyard. Inside, the driver was dead. Lee County Detective Tom Continos was one of the first to arrive at the home in St. Carlos Park.
Initially, I was told it was a motor vehicle accident. There was a dead body in the car. And the closer I looked, the more I realized that he didn't die from a car accident. He died from a bunch of bullet holes.
The driver's license found on the victim identified the dead man as 22-year-old Stephen Franken, the primary witness scheduled to testify against drug kingpin Jeff Matthews at a grand jury hearing just 2 days away. It seemed Matthews was aware that without Franken's testimony, investigators wouldn't have enough evidence to bring an indictment against the cocaine dealer, suspected in 2 killings and now a 3rd. According to DEA Special Agent Dennis Boland,
I think the timing of the murder was because of the timing of the grand jury, the information we received as far as Jeffrey Matthews being involved in other shootings and murders at Fort Myers Beach, and that Stephen Franken had some valuable information as far as Jeffrey Matthews' drug operation.
But now the grand jury would never learn what Franken knew about Matthews. The federal witness was likely dead before he crashed. Detectives decided to search the surrounding area to determine where the shooting had taken place.
Something happened before the guy hit the house, or else he wouldn't have driven through the house. So I walked down the dirt road about several hundred yards, and I found what looked like some attempt at a roadblock.
Large and small branches covered the road, strewn by what must have been a vehicle. To the left side of the site, detectives found several .22 caliber shell casings, the same caliber as the bullets later removed from Stephen Franken's body. Footprints, as well as tire impressions from a separate vehicle, were discovered close by in the loose dirt. Technicians made plaster casts for later comparison should a vehicle or suspect be located. From their placement in Franken's wounds, officers determined that the shooter had fired at the driver's side of the car.
My immediate thoughts were that someone had constructed this roadblock to slow a car down, slow the car down enough where someone can jump out of some brushy area that's along both sides of the road and shoot the person driving that car.
The gunman must have known when Franken left work and the route he traveled home. The victim probably stopped briefly when he saw debris in the road, just long enough for the shooter to take accurate aim. Clinging to life for a few more moments, he likely accelerated down the road and into the house. Though suspected murderer and drug dealer Jeff Matthews was believed responsible, investigators were once again left with no direct evidence tying Matthews to the crime. The fact that Stephen Franken had been a federal witness enabled authorities to broaden the investigation to include the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI. Together, they needed to develop a strategy to snare Jeff Matthews and put an end to the violence. Retired Special Agent Guy Notley was part of the team.
The FBI immediately started working with the Lee County Sheriff's Office and the Drug Enforcement Administration. There was nothing done without telling the other agency involved that what was going on. The FBI did have a lot of manpower that they could put on this matter. They did have tremendous ability for the technical aspect of the investigation.
They knew Matthews was still operating in the area, but the dealer was well insulated. The only way to get to him was through his drug operation and employees. But after the informant Franken was murdered, finding someone else to cooperate would be no easy task.
What made it so difficult was that we didn't have a lot of people come forward and voluntarily supply information on Jeffrey Matthews. Most of the people knew that he was capable of committing murders, and they were intimidated by him.
Agents turned to a man behind bars whom they believed had been an insider in Matthews' organization. Serving a 10-year sentence on concealed weapons charges, the Fort Myers Beach, Florida man was reputed to be one of Matthews' former hitmen. He agreed to tell what he knew about the dealer's drug operation in exchange for a shortened sentence. Just before his arrest, the alleged hitman admitted that Matthews had ordered him to surveil Stephen Franken to learn the man's schedule. With that information, Matthews would be able to silence Franken before he could testify against him. The convict denied knowing who actually pulled the trigger, since he was behind bars before the murder took place. He did tell investigators about another unsolved homicide he claimed that Matthews had committed. He said that one night at the pizza parlor, a contractor was repairing the tiles on the kitchen floor after the restaurant closed.
Try this with the sounds.
The hitman had brought over a new silencer for Matthews' gun.
No one's gonna hear anything. No one hear anything. That thing, either way. It's a heavy gun. Yeah. Look at that. Yeah, how's that? Nice target. Great.
He claimed the drug lord killed the contractor just to test the silencer. Agents hoped to get Matthews to corroborate the hitman's stories. The convict agreed to call Matthews to set up a recorded meeting. He asked Matthews to come by the prison to drop off some new music tapes. Matthews agreed.
Aye. Aye.
Agents would be ready to record the conversation on audio and video, hoping Matthews would incriminate himself.
We received approvals from the U.S. Attorney's Office as well as the jail to install these recorders. Then after we installed everything, he never did show up. Jeffrey Matthews is very elusive, surveillance conscious. He insulated himself pretty well. Even his closest friends didn't know where he was residing at.
Matthews' last suspected victim may have known. But because he was silenced, the alleged murderer remained free and was becoming more desperate. By early 1990, the FBI, DEA, and Florida authorities continued to pursue suspected drug lord and murderer Jeff Matthews. Since 1988, he had been implicated in 4 executions in the Fort Myers Beach area. For Lee County homicide detective Tom Continos and dozens of agents, a lack of hard evidence and verifiable witness statements kept Jeff Matthews just out of reach.
2 years have gone by and I still couldn't get my hands around Jeff Matthews. There was nothing there for me to follow up on. It was dead end after dead end after dead end. All the time I knew Jeff was my #1 suspect, and he was getting stronger and stronger and bolder on his criminal activities on the beach. And it was very frustrating.
On February 12, 1990, a judge agreed that investigators had enough circumstantial evidence against Matthews to search the dealer's pizza place, the likely headquarters for his operation. They served the warrant after hours to avoid endangering customers.
Upstairs, down here.
From the restaurant, investigators seized documents, phone records, and bank and credit card statements. They also confiscated Matthews' Trans Am. The tire treads were compared to impressions found at one of the murder scenes. The results were negative. Upstairs from the pizza parlor, investigators searched an apartment where Matthews was rumored to sometimes stay with his girlfriend. The couple was not there, nor did the searchers find any cocaine. But they did recover silver-tip .357 cartridges.
45 caliber cartridges. 22 calibers.
Cash, additional phone records, and most importantly, .22 caliber bullets. The same caliber used in at least 3 of the 4 executions. They were sent to the crime lab to be compared with the spent .22 caliber rounds retrieved from the victims. Tests of the bullets' metallurgic composition did not reveal any matches. It was one more dead end in a grueling case. Though there was no direct evidence linking the alleged drug dealer to the murders, DEA Special Agent Dennis Bolam and his team believed they had enough to indict Jeff Matthews and several associates as part of a continuing criminal enterprise.
We had concerns at that point that by leaving him out on the street, he could commit additional murders. So we felt we had sufficient evidence at that point, and that's the reason why we went and got the indictments to go pick him up.
But Matthews was nowhere to be found. Friends and associates claimed that he had left Fort Myers for parts unknown. His girlfriend, also named in the indictment, agreed to cooperate with investigators to help locate the fugitive. Through a tapped phone line, she made contact with Matthews on his cell.
Hello?
Hey, it's me.
Hey.
The suspected murderer refused to say where he was.
Don't worry about where I am.
It's kind of hard to get in touch with somebody.
She told him she was worried about the indictments.
If I find out who ratted on us, I'm going to kill him.
Matthews vowed that he would find out who was talking to authorities and kill them, plain and simple.
Where are you?
Yeah.
He hung up seconds later. The next day, A confidential informant gave Lee County homicide detectives a promising tip. They learned that Matthews had rented a car with a borrowed credit card on the night Stephen Franken was murdered.
Here's a picture. Can you tell us a little bit about the case?
An evidence technician compared the tire treads from the rental car to a plaster cast of the tracks collected at the scene of the ambush. They matched. It was the first hard evidence linking Matthews to one of the 4 murders. Unfortunately, it didn't prove that Matthews had driven the rental car to the crime scene, nor that he had pulled the trigger.
We were trying to gather as much information about Matthews as we could. We weren't even successful in finding out where this guy lived. We heard he lived in this big house. We heard he lived in that big house. He drove this car. He drove that car. But he was never there. We were never able to pin him down to where he lived. We only knew that he drove one car, and that's a black Trans Am. He was like, you know, he was everywhere but nowhere.
Then on the night of March 16, 1990, Lee County detectives responded to a call from the home of a Fort Myers Beach fire inspector. A pipe bomb was thrown into his driveway. Filled with .38 caliber bullets, the explosion sent ammunition and shrapnel ripping through the inspector's car and house. It also damaged a storage shed and a neighboring home. No one was injured. The inspector said he had no idea who might be responsible. Detectives asked him for a list of businesses that had failed any recent fire inspections.
You got any problems with anybody?
One name stood out.
Jeff Matthews.
I responded to that scene, learned that this fire inspector conducted a fire inspection of Matthews's restaurant and did not give him a very good write-up as far as the fire conditions of the restaurant. Once I heard that, I said, this is Jeff sending this guy a message.
But if it was Matthews, he had left no trace. All police had to go on was the spotty testimony of a neighbor. The neighbor had heard tires squeal just before the explosion. When he looked outside, he saw a white hatchback race away. It had been too dark to see the license plate. If Matthews had been involved, Detective Continos pondered his change in tactics.
I remember thinking that was a significant change in Jeff's operation. Before, he was targeting other drug dealers. Now he's targeting government officials, being that he was a Fort Myers Beach fire inspector. That is something different that Jeff was doing.
The detective returned home well after midnight. He tried to unwind, hoping to get some sleep. At about 2 a.m., the sound of an explosion sent him rushing to the window.
That sounded like a transformer blowing up, a car backfiring, fireworks. I mean, there's a number of things that happen in my neighborhood that sound could possibly occur. Phone rings 2 or 3 minutes later. It's one of my associates who's on the DEA task force, says, Tom, the DEA building just got blown up.
The Fort Myers DEA office was moments away from the detective's house.
I'm the first one on the scene, and I saw the entire DEA building engulfed in flames that are hundreds of feet high. I mean, it was an incredible sight for me.
Investigators immediately suspected fugitive Jeff Matthews. It was the first bombing of a DEA office in U.S. history. 30 firefighters battled the blaze for almost an hour. Dozens of agents, U.S. Marshals, and deputies from 6 neighboring counties were also called into help. FBI Special Agent Guy Notley was among them.
When I arrived on the morning of the bombing, on March 17th, DEA agents informed me that the suspect in this matter was most likely an individual that they indicted 2 days before, Jeffrey Matthews.
If this was the work of Jeff Matthews, the cocaine dealer's violence had escalated to horrific proportions. When law enforcement becomes the target, no one is safe. And Matthews was still on the run. On March 17, 1990, 2 days after a federal grand jury indicted suspected drug lord and murderer Jeff Matthews, the DEA office in Fort Myers Beach, Florida was firebombed. Agents suspected Matthews was responsible, but he was still at large. The FBI and Lee County Detective Tom Continos believed the fugitive was also the prime suspect in another bombing that occurred just hours earlier.
We realized that in all likelihood, that the pipe bomb at the fire inspector's house was a diversionary tactic to pull law enforcement resources away from the patrolling area of the DEA building in order for Matthews to firebomb the DEA office.
By dawn, all that remained of the building was a burned-out shell. Investigators now began the task of assessing what was left, how it happened, and where the evidence was buried, hoping to identify the perpetrator. FBI Special Agent Guy Notley called in specialists from headquarters.
We brought in bomb technicians from our laboratory in Washington, D.C., as well as some FBI agents from the Tampa division to conduct an investigation. The investigation consisted of going through all the debris that was left at the site, basically by taking it through a shovel and sifting through till we found out what incendiary device that's used.
They determined that the fire was caused by a pipe bomb taped to 2 5-gallon gas cans and tossed through a window. It landed in the office of DEA agent Dennis Bolam. He believed the aim was no coincidence.
My feeling is Jeffrey Matthews was trying to destroy the evidence in the case, and I had the case files on the Jeffrey Matthews case in a file cabinet right near the window, and amazingly the fire and the explosion went right past it, and everything was intact as far as tape recordings and notes and so forth.
Because of the early hour, no one was injured, but damage was estimated at $4 million. Through scattered witness accounts, investigators pieced together a possible scenario for the bombing. No one knew how many people were involved. But neighbors heard only one car and one door open, then close. Investigators figured those responsible stopped close to the building for a quick hit and run. The bombing had a profound effect on area law enforcement. Agents struggled to deal with the physical reality of the destruction and their emotional reactions.
I was shocked, and then I was angry, and then I was more determined to get him at that point than anything. It's changed my life because I had to have 24-hour guard on my house, as well as the other agents and the prosecutor in the case. I had a wife and 2 small children that I had to worry about, and they had to be protected. And I knew that he was still running around out there, and that there's a possibility that he could do this again.
FBI lab examiners inspected the remnants of the bomb. Nails used as shrapnel were packed into a metal pipe 5 inches in diameter with a unique threading and surrounded with gunpowder. Duct tape held the pipe between 2 5-gallon tanks of gasoline that helped to spread the fire when the bomb went off.
Pretty much familiar with the murders.
100 DEA agents joined the team, and the 4-person FBI office grew to more than 50. Investigators began tracking down where the bomb materials may have been purchased. Teams of agents canvassed every hardware store and gas station for miles around. The pipe used in the bomb had a unique threading. Agents found the store clerk who had sold this unusual item just days before the explosion. The clerk identified Matthews as the customer who had purchased it. Agents asked dozens of gas station employees if they remembered anyone purchasing gas in 2 5-gallon tanks during the past week or so. One remembered that a man fitting Matthews' description had done so recently. The evidence was mounting against the bomber, but agents still had no idea where he was. They interviewed his friends and associates to determine with whom he'd been in contact.
You know Jeffrey, don't you? And how do you know Jeffrey?
One told them that he had written to her, begging her not to believe what she read about him in the newspapers. But she had believed the articles and agreed to have her phone monitored so agents might trace a call from Matthews.
Well, that would be great. You'd be willing to do that? I think you could help us.
He was elusive. We never knew where he would be at any given time. He was always on the move. So we utilized a trap and trace. We knew that he utilized a cell phone, and we were trying to zero in exactly where he was.
With a signed affidavit, agents went to the company that handled Matthews' wireless account. If there was a hit on a cell tower from his phone, authorities would be alerted. They discovered he was still in Florida.
We had even aerial surveillance set up in the Orlando area where we found out where his cell phone was coming from to see if when he made a call that we could get people there quickly in an attempt to apprehend him.
But agents were unable to trace Matthews' calls closer than a 2-mile radius. Then investigators received the tip they were hoping for. They raced to a Fort Myers storage facility where the manager had recognized Matthews from the media. The fugitive was presently unloading a truck there. Agents hoped they could get there before the suspected murderer and bomber escaped again. In the spring of 1990, FBI agents raced to arrest 26-year-old fugitive Jeff Matthews, suspected in 4 murders and the bombing of the Fort Myers, Florida DEA building. A team of agents responded to a call from a storage facility manager who had seen the wanted man on his property.
Turn around! Face the opposite direction. Keep your hands up.
Agents approached the suspect, ready to use deadly force. They removed his wallet to check his ID.
Okay.
The man was not Jeff Matthews. After 2 years of pursuit, Lee County, Florida Detective Tom Continos was disappointed, but not discouraged.
I just knew that at some point we were going to get him. He was too active, he was too violent. What concerned me was at what cost before we got him. We just didn't know how long it was going to take and how many dead people it was going to take for us to get there. That was my concern.
Is this where he kept his stuff?
Yes, sir, it is.
All right, thank you.
Investigators received a tip from a realtor who claimed to have rented a house to Jeff Matthews before he was a known fugitive. They found common items, including duct tape and hardware store bags that might be linked to the bombing. Then they came across something that seemed clearly connected to Matthews' crimes, as DEA Special Agent Dennis Bolam recalls.
There was a note, and the note was addressed to the Lee County Sheriff's Department. I don't know the exact verbiage that was used in it, but it's something to the effect that catch me if you can.
Catching me because you won't.
Investigators sharpened their resolve to find him before anyone else was killed.
Jeffrey.
On April 9th, 1990, Matthews called his friend's tapped phone. Agents were prepared to strike if the woman could keep him on the line.
All right, yeah, I can.
This time he was calling from a payphone, according to FBI Special Agent Guy Notley.
We were able to determine that he was in the Orlando area. Agents were sent to different quadrants where they could be within 10 or 15 minutes of different pay phones that we thought maybe Matthews was using.
Field agents waited for the word as precious seconds ticked by. The woman asked him where he was, but Matthews was anxious to hang up. Despite his best efforts, they got the trace. Agents set out to apprehend him before he vanished again.
Our people were able to put a location on where the phone call was coming from. Agents were only about 5 or 10, 15 minutes away. They arrived at the scene. He was still talking when the agents arrived.
FBI, you're under arrest. Show us your hands. Show us your hands.
After almost 3 years of pursuit, investigators arrested Jeff Matthews without incident. To avoid the death penalty, Jeff Matthews pled guilty to supervising a continuing criminal enterprise, committing homicide to further that enterprise, cocaine trafficking, and bombing a federal building. On July 31st, 1990, Matthews asked to speak to DEA and FBI agents. He said they needed to move on something right away or more innocent people would surely be killed. The convicted killer had a storage unit in Gainesville, Florida, loaded with explosives in a booby-trapped van. Agents immediately notified the bomb squad.
I had concerns that he may be trying to set us up. Maybe have his last hurrah before he went away to jail, and that we might be sending some agents into a real dangerous situation.
As Matthews had described, agents found a red van parked inside a storage unit rigged to explode. A bomb squad defused the devices and secured the area. With the booby trap rendered harmless, investigators quickly removed the dozen pipe bombs they found in the van. They also recovered an AR-15, a MAC-10, a MAC-11, and a .22 caliber handgun with a silencer.
There was rubber masks, Halloween masks. There was police raid jackets. There was additional bombs, bomb-making equipment, manuals on how to make bombs, how to make booby traps, fuses and equipment to make bombs, including pieces of piping and timers and so forth.
Matthews also told investigators where they could find the body of the contractor murdered in his pizza parlor more than 2 years earlier, though Matthews claimed that his hitman had done the actual killing. Matthews said he and the hitman had carried the body in a freezer to the house Jeff was renting and buried the victim nearby. It was the same house where investigators had found Matthews' taunting note. They located both the freezer and the body, just where the killer said they would be. For this crime, Matthews pled guilty as an accessory.
Drug dealers just don't start off a business by killing people. And most of them don't kill people. But Jeff was a very violent, organized person. And that made him dangerous. And that made him even harder to catch.
On October 1st, 1990, 26-year-old Jeff Matthews was sentenced to 100 years in prison without the possibility of parole. He will never again be free to terrorize the people of Fort Myers Beach, Florida. 3 mysterious deaths in a Florida river confound local authorities. The preliminary investigation reveals little. But when police and the FBI find a sinister link to international drug smuggling, they uncover a conspiracy of unbridled greed and ruthless violence. It's a case that thrusts an entire city into chaos.
In the 1980s, thousands of violent criminals flooded into America from Cuba and Colombia. Drugs hit South Florida, and the area, bloated with illicit wealth, became a violent powder keg. I'm Jim Kallstrom, former head of the FBI's New York office. In the bloody Miami drug wars, the winners got rich, the losers buried, and everyone was a target.
Colombia, South America. Until the 1970s, life was simple but hard. Then, a failed economy gave way to a sharp rise in drug trafficking. The drug trade caused stiff competition that literally began to rip the country apart. Ruthless Colombian drug lords began consolidating their businesses into partnerships known as cartels. Death came to anyone who got in their way. As the cartel's influence grew, so did the American appetite for illicit drugs. And Miami became the prime point of entry for most of the cocaine smuggled into the country. And with it came bloodshed. Colombian assassins were sent to Miami to wipe out the local competition. The homicide rate grew to more than triple the national average for large cities. Miami was named the murder capital of the U.S. Former Metro-Dade homicide detective Alex Alvarez recalls how in 1979, violence came to a Miami shopping mall.
His date of birth is... Several drug traffickers bought out a step van, lined it with bulletproof vests and portholes, and did a drug hit in the parking lot and sprayed it with, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of rounds in the parking lot trying to kill their intended target.
2 known drug traffickers were killed, and several innocent bystanders were wounded.
There were also incidents of high-speed pursuits on the expressway between 2 drug dealers that were just shooting it out on the expressway during rush hour traffic. And numerous people were being injured and killed. It was like the wild, wild west, so there was a need to try to curb and stop these drug traffickers who seemed to be out of control.
A special squad was formed to deal with the violence. Central Tactical Unit, or CENTAC 26, was headquartered at the Metro-Dade Police Department. Sergeant George Placencia was a detective assigned to the unit, the first of its kind in Miami.
It was a 26th one in the nation. The purpose of forming that task force was that we would go out and monitor all the homicides in Dade County and pick and choose the ones that we thought involved major drug traffickers and attempt to work that angle, the homicide angle, and dismantle the organization.
By the mid-1980s, constant pressure from law enforcement slowly changed the way drug traffickers were doing business in Miami.
They got a little bit more sophisticated. They still did the murders, but not the shootouts in public.
Drug traffickers went deep underground, organizing cells that excluded all but family and close friends. Many cells specialized in activities such as cocaine transportation, distribution, or money laundering. In only a few years, the business had become large and sophisticated, and still very deadly. On the afternoon of July 29, 1985, a marine salvager working on the Miami River noticed something. Off the bow of his boat, floating in the water, was a body. By the time Metro-Dade County Police responded, dock workers had pulled 2 more bodies from the river. The coroner examined the deceased for any signs of trauma or gunshot wounds. He found none. It appeared that the 3 had drowned. On the bodies, officers found beepers, Rolex watches, and plenty of cash. 2 were armed. Essentially, they were all carrying the tools of a drug smuggler. Metro-Dade police called Syntac 26. Sergeant Placencia investigated.
Yeah, hold on, let me write this down. How many people you got over there? We started doing area cams to see if anybody had seen anything suspicious or had seen these individuals prior to them meeting their demise, and that proved to be, you know, not so fruitful at all. Nobody had seen anything.
The 3 victims were identified as local Cuban Americans. 2 had minor police records. The official cause of death was drowning, but there was no indication how they ended up in the water or why. Detective Alex Alvarez searched for a lead in the case.
We began running records checks and contacting the Drug Enforcement Administration to see if these people were known drug traffickers.
Agents at the DEA did not know the men, but they did have a source that could help.
Right. What's the address? They had an informant, and that informant knew the son of one of the dead people that were fished out of the Miami rivers, and it was definitely drug-related. And he was going to put us into contact with the son.
That afternoon, investigators paid a visit to the son.
You know why we're here,
He was willing to tell what he knew, hoping that the mystery of his father's death could be solved.
Can you tell us what you know and how you found out about it?
Well, I know it's a really big business. He brings in thousands.
He told us that his father was one of the biggest drug smugglers in South Florida. He brought in thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds of cocaine.
Well, I know last Saturday
He said his father's crew used run-down, steel-hulled vessels to smuggle drugs into the country, since the old boats aroused less suspicion than big yachts. He also detailed how the smugglers built false bulkheads into the boats, concealing hidden compartments filled with hundreds and sometimes thousands of pounds of cocaine. When Customs searched these boats, their only hope of finding drugs would be to use a welding torch.
See, the smugglers are smart. They know that there's no way that Customs in the open ocean is going to put a torch to a boat, because if they're wrong, they'll sink the boat.
Now safely past Customs, the smugglers would continue to move their enormous cargo up the Miami River.
They would park at a marina and then let it sit there for 2 or 3 days to make sure there's no surveillance. And on the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th day, when they were convinced there was no surveillance, they'd come at the middle of the night, unload the drugs into vans, and ship them off to different locations within South Florida.
The son said he had been visited by 2 of his father's friends who were on board the ship the night his father drowned. They told him that the boat was raided by a group of gunmen dressed as cops.
So that's where your father was going that night.
The raiders threw the 6-man crew overboard and then stole about 450 kilos of cocaine.
Each kilo at that time was worth approximately $60,000. So the net retail value of this load was approximately $27 million. Now that's not the street value. The street value is probably 2-3 times that.
The son provided the names of all 3 men who survived, but said he didn't know how to contact them. The Syntac detectives needed to find out if there had been a legitimate raid at the marina. They contacted every law enforcement agency in South Florida that handled drug cases.
None of them had any operations close to the boatyard where this incident happened. So at that time, when I canceled out that this was a legitimate raid, my next focus was, well, these people must have been phony cops, people impersonating police officers, because there was a trend at that time for people to dress up as police officers and raid drug dealers' homes and steal their cash and steal their drugs.
To check the victim's son's story, investigators went to the marina where the raid took place. They interviewed the security guard who had been on duty that night.
How are you?
He said that 7 or 8 men in police uniforms rushed the marina and headed for one of the boats.
They went right past the security guard. The security guard said, being South Florida, there's nothing unusual, you know, go at it.
He hadn't gotten a good look at any of them. Investigators later searched that boat, but found no clues. So they turned their attention to looking for the 3 men who had survived the raid. 2 of the 3 survivors had minor police records, but could not be located at their last known address. The next day, Sect 26 detectives played a hunch. They figured that the survivors would likely be going to the wake for one of the deceased victims.
So we showed up at the funeral home with the names and identities of the people who we were looking for.
The detectives were right. They recognized the survivors from arrest photos and approached the men as they entered. The men confirmed the boat was overrun by a group of raiders dressed like cops.
They're wearing blue uniforms.
But the men denied the boat was involved in drug running. They claimed they were simply having a party.
They had been drinking beer with the 3 victims and 2 additional friends. And while they were there drinking beer and having a good time, people in blue uniforms stormed past the front gate of the marina and started yelling, "Police, police."
The gunmen began assaulting them.
They said several friends were thrown in the water by these individuals dressed in blue uniforms.
Within minutes, all 6 men were overboard in the Miami River. But only 3 swam to safety. The investigation had now become a triple homicide. The Sect 26 detectives were convinced the raid was yet another instance of fake cops ripping off drug dealers. But again, the survivors denied that drugs were on the boat and insisted they did not know why the men attacked them. They said they didn't see any badge numbers or police cars, couldn't even tell which department the uniforms were from. With no detailed information from the 2 witnesses, the investigators were left without any significant leads. With the case stalled, the FBI offered their assistance. Special Agent Robert Martin.
At about the same time that the homicide investigation began regarding the 3 bodies found in the Miami River, an FBI cooperating witness provided some information to us regarding a group of police officers who were involved in some rip-offs. And he identified who those guys were, at least several of them, knew who some of them were, and had conversations with them.
Detective Alvarez got an unexpected call from an agent in counterintelligence.
He says he needs to meet with us, that he has a motive and possible information about our case. He put 2 and 2 together, so maybe this is related to this information that I'm getting through my informant, Armando Un. Now we can narrow down.
Armando Un, the FBI agent said, was a well-connected nightclub worker that knew about a group of crooked cops who were ripping off drug dealers along the Miami River. Sect 26 detectives went to see Armando Un. But he did not want to see them. The interview went nowhere. It would take the murder of a friend before Armando Un would talk. A motorist was driving through the Everglades. He spotted something that piqued his curiosity, a wooden box. He pulled over. To his horror, he found a body inside. He called police. Detectives from Miami-Dade's Drug Task Force, Sect 26, were investigating the deaths of 3 men found floating in the Miami River. They hoped an informant named Armando Un could help them. His friend and employer had been found murdered in the Florida Everglades. His name was Luis Rodriguez, the owner of a nightclub in Miami's Little Havana district. He'd been shot several times in the head and then stuffed in a box rigged to spring open. A gruesome display. Investigating for Syntac 26 was Detective Alex Alvarez and Sergeant George Plasencia. They needed to get Armando Un to talk.
We never mentioned anything about the 3 bodies. Our ploy in speaking to him was that we were investigating the death of his best friend, the murder of his best friend.
According to Detective Plasencia, Armando Un was very candid.
We sat down and chatted with him for a while about Luis Rodriguez, and he said, yeah, Luis Rodriguez was involved in drug trafficking.
Would you recognize him? Do you know what
He admitted that Rodriguez was dealing drugs out of his nightclub and said he believed the men Rodriguez was involved with killed him.
It is true that he was trafficking drugs.
He was furious that his friend had been murdered and said he wanted to help.
He was making money for everybody.
But if he knew about police officers, real or fake, robbing drug dealers, he said nothing.
He never mentioned that the police officers were involved. He did say that Luis Rodriguez was friendly with some officers.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Armando Un seemed wary and selected his words carefully. When the interview ended, the detectives still had no suspects in the Miami River murders. All they really knew was that Luis Rodriguez was dead and may be the 4th drug murder victim in as many days. Then a City of Miami detective contacted Plasencia and Alvarez with a surprising lead. He said that Luis Rodriguez had also worked for him as a police informant.
He told us that Luis Rodriguez was giving him information about people who were dressed as police imposters and were ripping off drug dealers and committing murders in Dade County.
The detective explained that he had met Luis Rodriguez through a Miami patrol officer named Marco Rivera.
I said, we need your help now. I need you to set up a meeting between the street cop and George and I, and let's tell him that we're investigating Luis Rodriguez's murder. That'll be the cover story.
The meeting was set for that night at the Miami Police Department. Officer Ribeiro worked the late shift in 60 sector, police code for Little Havana. He verified that he knew Luis Rodriguez and that Rodriguez had, on occasion, been his informant. But then, without prompting, he brought up the Miami River drownings.
He volunteered some information about the 3 bodies that were floating up in the Miami River. He said that these guys stole the drugs themselves, and when the owner of the drugs found out about it, had them murdered, or they were thrown in the water and drowned themselves, that there was no cops involved at all.
His denial that officers were involved, which no one had mentioned, seemed too forceful. The Syntac 26 detectives tested him.
We asked this patrolman to repeat a story at the conclusion of our meeting, and we detected that this story didn't fit the first story that he had told us. There was something wrong there.
Rivera claimed a street source told him about the raid, so the detectives asked to speak directly with the source.
Yeah, I guess so. You know, just give me a call tomorrow. I'll try to contact him, and if I can't get in contact with him for any reason, I'll let you guys know.
For the Syntac investigators, the case had taken a dramatic turn. This officer, sworn to uphold the law, seemed to be hiding something. The following day, Officer Marco Rivera introduced the detectives to the source who allegedly had information about the Miami River murders.
if I should even be talking to these guys. I don't even know, bro.
Rivera claimed his source could verify that drug trafficking Colombians had carried out the raid, not Miami cops.
Hey, listen on, man. Hey, listen, we understand that.
But as the source spoke, he had a hard time remembering details of his story. Officer Rivera had to help him remember, according to Detective Alvarez.
The officer keeps having to correct him. No, it happened like this, and tell him about this, and he's filling in the blanks for this guy who's obviously been coached and cued on what to say. So we knew at that point, obviously, he was covering something up.
Officer Rivera's cover-up meant the detectives were faced with an even more serious problem. In case the deadly raiders were actually Miami police officers, they needed to be very careful.
This is a problem that we weren't really trained or focused in to investigate, which is, we're not internal affairs investigators. We don't investigate cops. That wasn't our role. That wasn't our job. But we were charged with the responsibilities of investigating these murders, and if these murders were committed by cops, they were fair play. We realized that if we were going to start to investigate cops, we'd have to do things very differently.
The Syntac 26 detectives had to cover themselves. They asked the police chief to hold their personnel files as a precaution against internal leaks.
We did a lot of things to protect our identity and our family's identity. We took everything that we had in our names and took them out of our names so they couldn't trace where we lived and who we were. We're investigating. They're going to find out who we are. So right away, we built a wall between them and us.
Once they felt safe, Syntac detectives began investigating the officers working the night shift in 60 Sector, Little Havana, Officer Marco Rivera's beat.
Sounds good. Okay.
With the chief's permission, Miami PD's internal affairs gave Syntac 26 the personnel records for the officers in question.
Well, the City of Miami Internal Affairs Unit was very concerned. They were very cooperative. The names that we provided to them, they started looking into and giving us the backgrounds that they had on these individuals.
The investigators focused on a close-knit group of 8 officers, all relatively recent hires who joined the force at a time when Miami was in crisis. In the spring of 1980, Cuban President Fidel Castro had announced he would allow thousands of political refugees to seek asylum in foreign countries. The U.S. agreed to accept 3,500. Then, unexpectedly, Castro announced that for the first time in years, he would also allow American boats to enter Mariel Harbor. The result was what became known as the Mariel Boat Lift. More than 120,000 Cuban refugees flooded into South Florida, which overwhelmed Miami's ability to handle them. Most were hard-working immigrants looking for a chance at the American dream. Most, but not all.
10% of them was estimated were criminals that were dumped out of the prison system of Fidel Castro. So there was a spike in the crime wave in Miami-Dade County.
To stem the rising crime rate, the city had to hire over 400 new cadets in 3 years.
Instead of hiring the best candidate, they hired anybody who was just marginally acceptable. They just couldn't find enough quality candidates, and they went for quantity as opposed to quality.
Syntac 26 began surveillance, watching as the officers in question hung out together after hours, enjoying lifestyles far beyond the means of honest police officers. Marco Rivera was the suspected ringleader. Armando Garcia had recently become part owner of a bodybuilding gym. Osvaldo Coelho had just retired from the force. He was 30 years old, driving a $100,000 Lotus. It was easy to track their lavish spending.
One officer bought a home and built this pool, and he paid the developer cash, showed up with a bag full of cash and gave it to him here for the purchase of my home.
Still, the detectives had little solid evidence.
Yeah, I'm in front of the restaurant. I don't see any marked units over here. Our boy is definitely over here having coffee with some friends outside, but I don't see any units.
They needed first-hand information, and they needed it soon. If these officers had already left at least 3 people dead, the detectives feared there could easily be more. 4 people had been murdered in Miami over a $27 million drug deal, gone bad. With so much money involved, the dividing line between the criminals and the cops blurred. The FBI offered their assistance to local law enforcement. Special Agent Robert Martin.
We began an investigation which became a joint investigation into whether there was some police corruption in the city of Miami.
Drug Task Force detectives with Sect 26 had narrowed their investigation to a suspected group of corrupt Miami police officers. But the detectives needed inside information if they had any chance of cracking the case. They hoped they could get it from a reluctant police informer named Armando Un. They had already interviewed Un about the murder of his friend and partner, nightclub owner Luis Rodriguez. He seemed wary, perhaps afraid they too were dirty cops.
Hey, Armando, I want you to look at these photographs, see if you recognize anyone.
Detective George Placencia tried to win his trust by showing photos of their surveillance of the suspect officers.
And he started looking through the photos, and he just paused. He dropped the photographs and shook her hand, and he says, "You guys are doing a good job. Let's sit down and talk."
But unfortunately, these things go wrong sometimes.
Un came down to Sect 26, where he told Detective Alex Alvarez he figured he had nothing to lose.
He was scared. He thought, well, if I stick it out with the crooked cops, they were the ones that probably killed my partner. And he said, well, if they killed him, the next person to go is me.
In a marathon debriefing, he explained the origins of the rogue officers and their criminal enterprise. He said his friend and employer, nightclub owner Luis Rodriguez, had grown tired of the officers coming into his bar and shaking down his patrons for small amounts of drugs.
He wanted to make sure that his customers weren't bothered. So he first started paying the cops off not to come.
And you can maybe get a couple of gram arrests. But
soon he devised another plan that could make everyone some money.
You know, sometimes these things happen. It's just the nature of the business.
According to Un, Luis Rodriguez said to the officers, hey, you know what? Instead of arresting these people that are coming over here with petty drugs, why don't I set up deals, you know, maybe multi-kilo deals, more drugs involved, and when these people come over, I'll give you a description of their car, where they're coming from. You can stop them, steal their cocaine, bring it to me, I'll sell it, I'll give you a share.
The officers agreed.
What made this whole thing possible for these cops was they grew up and knew people who were in the drug trade. And that was the one aspect of what they had going for them.
Patrolman Marco Rivera ran the ripoffs. It seemed a perfect plan. The dealers would never incriminate themselves by reporting the thefts, and Rodriguez would always come through with the cash.
Get in your car. You have a good night now.
Un said the operation grew quickly, with more and more cops becoming involved. But they got greedy, wanting to do more rip-offs and bigger ones.
So the policeman said, okay, it was all good. And it all first began with...
Rodriguez introduced them to a second bar owner who knew of larger shipments.
Luis Rodriguez brought in another bar owner. He knew and he worked smuggling boatloads of drugs into the United States. And Rodriguez says, wait a minute, why stop at these 1 kilo, 2 kilograms of cocaine drug bust? Why don't we go for the boatloads and get 300, 400, 500 kilograms of cocaine at one shot?
Un didn't know about the raid where the 3 men drowned, but he did describe an earlier one the second bar owner had set up. A group of Miami officers had slipped aboard a boat at another marina, thinking the crew had left for the night.
Clear.
They knew exactly where the drugs were hidden. But during the unloading, they noticed the air conditioning was on. And suspected the crew was still on board, hiding.
Oye, nadie está muerto, alguien está aquí. Alguien está aquí, oye. Chequea ahí abajo. Espérate.
The crewmen surrendered.
Póngalo, abajo. Sí, abajo. Vámonos. Vamos. Uno por uno.
The raiders wasted no time disposing of the crew, as they had in the other raid. This time, no one drowned. All the men swam safely to shore. The cops finished up, then drove off with about 200 kilos of cocaine, valued at over $10 million. Armando Un confirmed the names of the officers involved, the very ones Sentak had been watching. Unfortunately, the investigators knew his credibility would be attacked in court.
Jury's not going to believe Armando Un, a self-proclaimed admitted drug trafficker, over, half a dozen or a dozen respected police officers. They're just not going to believe it. So we need more evidence.
What they needed was a confession on tape from the very cops they were investigating. They brought in the local bar owner from the drug raids and explained the evidence they had implicating him in the ripoffs. He reluctantly agreed to wear a wire and to meet with Officer Marco Rivera. But he said Rivera had been avoiding him for weeks, no doubt because of the Sentak 26 investigation. They would have to trick him into the meeting. Investigators hoped the results would be worth the risk. Detectives set up in a building across from a bar in the area Rivera patrolled and sent the informant inside. When surveillance units confirmed Rivera was nearby, detectives called 911 and reported a bar fight.
Some officers down to 34th and 8th.
Officer Rivera drove up just as they planned. Rivera entered, looking for the alleged fight, but everything was quiet. The informant made his move. He told the officer he had been subpoenaed by the U.S. Attorney's Office and wanted to know what to say. Rivera took the bait, but he didn't want to talk in front of witnesses. The corrupt cop spoke freely about his involvement in the drug operation.
So what's the real deal? Why are you worried?
So I can't join him with, but yeah, he's dead. He ain't gonna talk. Unless they go in that courtroom with a Ouija board
Rivera had no idea everything he said was being recorded. In Miami, investigators pursued a group of rogue police officers suspected of ripping off drug dealers and killing at least 3 of them. The detectives of Sect 26 finally managed to tape an incriminating conversation with the group's leader, Officer Rivera, as he talked about the raids, the drugs, the dirty cops. Detective Alex Alvarez.
It was key evidence because it was the corrupt police officer's own words about what he did, when he did it, and who he did it with.
The U.S. Attorney's Office in Miami reviewed the tapes. Assistant U.S. Attorney Russell Killinger knew they would need as much evidence as possible to convince a jury that several Miami law enforcement officers were behind the murders and thefts. The tapes provided a good start, but Killinger needed more evidence to implicate the other officers. Perhaps Armando Un could get it.
We wanted to get Un wearing a wire and talking to the other cops so that we get those other cops to confirm their own participation out of their own mouths.
Wearing a wire, Un met with Miami officers Marco Rivera and Armando Garcia. He told them that investigators were asking him questions about the boat raids. They warned him not to cooperate. He assured him Syntac had nothing on any of them.
Listen, they all over me. They all over me.
They all over everybody. It doesn't matter. They got nothing. They don't have a damn thing on their face. I don't want you guys to be seen.
But then they became suspicious, asking him if he was wired. That effectively halted all plans to record any more of the officers. But investigators were undaunted.
We decided to take more of an overt approach in the investigation and go to the next level, which was basically subpoenaing witnesses to the grand juries, issuing bank subpoenas for bank records and financial records.
Investigators began cataloging the assets of the suspects, including Marco Rivera's safety deposit box at a Miami bank. The box contained over $260,000 in cash, nearly 10 times his annual salary. Like Rivera, the other suspect officers left incriminating money trails.
The money was burning holes in their pockets, and they were going out and spending money left and right. They buy $20,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 cars, cash. They bought homes valued in excess of $200,000, cash. They bought expensive furniture. They put down cash. Now, this is an officer who's making $30,000. We had an enormous amount of evidence.
The financial records, together with the taped conversations, were enough evidence for arrest warrants to be issued.
Expecting you guys.
2 days after Christmas 1985, Sect 26, Miami PD, and the FBI began the arrests, taking down 6 Miami cops, including the ringleader, Officer Marco Rivera. Officer Armando Garcia was also arrested without incident. Osvaldo Coelho and Emilio Rey surrendered in the following days. The trial began on September 29, 1986. Federal prosecutors thought they had a strong case.
We felt pretty good about the case. We'd gotten pretty much all the evidence in that we had hoped to get in.
Then, on January 21st, 1987, the jury came back with their verdicts.
I remember the judge just kept looking at the verdict forms, and he would look at one and put it down, and look at another and put it down, then pick up the other one and look at it again, and this went on for, it seemed like an eternity. And then he started shaking his head.
The jury was deadlocked, causing the judge to declare a mistrial. One juror had refused to deliberate. Investigators were stunned as all suspects were released.
That was really a low point in the investigation. We found out later, because the 11 jurors that voted for for conviction, were so convinced that these officers, because of all the evidence, were guilty, they started coming forward and saying, you know, we started getting contacted by friends and family members of these cops offering us jobs and offering us money, and we knew that that was an attempt to try to get us to sway our votes.
The mistrial was an enormous setback. Detectives knew if they could not put these corrupt cops away, the people of Miami may never trust law enforcement again. A group of Miami officers were arrested and prosecuted for corruption, but chaos in the jury room resulted in a mistrial. All suspects were released.
They were thrilled that they weren't convicted. What they didn't realize that it was probably a blessing in disguise for us, because all that did is give us more time, and we were more determined to find out more evidence against them, and that's exactly what happened.
The prosecutor and detectives were unwilling to give up. With so much at stake, investigators needed a break. They finally got one.
We found out that these officers had hired a hitman to kill Armando Un.
That hitman was Killer Joe Martinez. He confessed to being hired, hoping he'd get leniency for another crime he had committed.
We brought him in. He testified against the river cops. We were able to add more charges against them. And by that time, you know, the case was just becoming stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, and they had nowhere to go, and then they started to fold and they started to cooperate.
The case finally broke wide open when one of the defendants, Patrolman Emilio Rey, decided to confess. Through his lawyer, he had learned of the additional evidence against him. He hoped for sentencing leniency in exchange for his testimony.
He described to us some fairly bone-chilling conspiracies that had gone on and that were going on in an effort to try to kill the government witnesses.
All of the government's witnesses, especially Armando Un, were in danger. Investigators knew they had to use Patrolman Rey's confession to put more pressure on the other river cops. Facing the beefed-up federal case, ringleader Marco Rivera confessed.
He had implicated some 60 other City of Miami police officers in various criminal activities.
Unfortunately, Osvaldo Coelho and Armando Garcia fled the Miami area. 5 months later, an FBI informant said Coelho was hiding in the Bahamas. The FBI has no formal jurisdiction outside the United States, so it maintains legal attaché offices called legats in many foreign countries. They work as liaisons with each country's national police. The FBI liaison asked the Bahamian police for their assistance. They agreed to help get Coelho. Coelho was wanted for taking part in massive and deadly cocaine rip-offs in Miami. Investigators knew he had a broad network of friends he could ask for help. Coelho called one of them several times to arrange for assistance.
Yeah, I can help you. What do you need?
Okay, I can do that. Good. See you later.
What Coelho didn't know was that the FBI had already approached the friend, and he was working as an informant. The Bahamian police arrested Osvaldo Coelho without incident. He was extradited back to Miami to face charges of drug trafficking, conspiracy, and racketeering. Armando Garcia was the last of the rogue Miami cops still at large. On January 8, 1989, the FBI added Garcia to their 10 most wanted fugitives list. FBI Special Agent Robert Martin.
We don't pick our top 10 fugitives lightly. They have to be people that we consider to be a serious danger, not only to society, but to the very nature and fabric of what makes our country what it is. And one of those things is honest law enforcement services. Garcia was added to the list for that reason.
The FBI had evidence that Garcia may have fled to South America, but had few leads. Special Agent Robert Martin ran the public corruption squad that kept searching for the elusive fugitive.
Armando Garcia was uniquely qualified to understand what it was going to take to survive out of the country. Here was a police officer who knew every technique that we might use to find him or capture him. A guy that knew the difficulties moving in and out of foreign countries and doing investigations in those foreign countries. On top of that, you had a guy that had a lot of money. Hey, I was just looking at these passports.
Garcia could be anywhere. For 4 years, agents looked into hundreds of leads with negative results.
No, I'll ask. Ian, do you have...
Then, in late 1993, the FBI got a tip. A friend was planning to visit the Garcia family in Colombia.
Okay, she didn't have it. I tell you, if you just make that call.
Agents worked with the Colombian police who followed the friend to an apartment in Cali. Agents believed that fugitive Armando Garcia was living there.
The Colombian National Police set up a surveillance with a number of units. It was going to be a 24-hour surveillance, and waited to see if they could identify anybody who would come out or travel around with her.
Three days later, they spotted Armando Garcia. The fugitive was caught off guard, unarmed.
Hold it, Garcia.
Garcia told them, said, I have $4,000 with me. You see the jewelry I have, you see my automobile, I have goods and belongings in my apartment. You can have all of that if you just let me go. And to quote the Colombian National Police official who came to Miami to describe events, they then told Armando Garcia, we're not the dirty cops, you are.
The last of the main suspects, Armando Garcia pleaded guilty to drug trafficking, racketeering, and tax evasion, and was sentenced to 25 years. When it was all over, 17 Miami officers were convicted for their involvement in the drug rip-off ring. It was the largest police corruption case in Florida history. In response to the scandal, the City of Miami Police Department formed its own internal investigations unit that targeted over 100 additional officers.
They obviously were suffering from all the media exposure and then the embarrassment of having numerous officers arrested, but I think it made them a stronger department. When you weed out the bad officers, it just makes the good officers shine even brighter.